Incorporating MIDI instruments does not just mean always loading up a preset or choosing something that Logic or a third-party provider has already given to you. It can also mean taking an element from the song that you or the artist already recorded and putting it into something like a sampler to get a whole new sound or change the vibe of that section of your song. You can use this to achieve effects like in the song Thunder by Imagine Dragons, where the vocals slide around during the chorus, and it's a sound that's very similar to what DJ Snake does or Major Lazer. Let me show you what I mean. We have here a synthesizer. And I like the way it sounds, and it goes well with this part of the song. But we can actually decide later that we want to change the instrumentation of it, but still maintain that original sound. Now, of course, we could create the synth from scratch again in something like Massive or Serum, but there's actually a faster way to do it. Let's actually use this original synth audio as our instrument. There's two ways to do that within Logic. One of them is using Alchemy, and the other one is using the EXS24. That, to be honest, I feel is out of date compared to Alchemy, but it is a lot simpler. So if you want to do something quick like what we're about to do, it'll work perfectly. And it's the same for those vocal slides. You don't need anything that fancy. Alchemy is fantastic, but it gets really complicated really fast. So let's dive in. If I chop up this one note from our synthesizer, we'll just take a listen right here. I'm going to hit Command U to set a cycle range around the selected region, and let's listen. Alright, so that's pretty good. I had a tuner on here so that I could tell what note this was, and it's D sharp. We're going to use that information later. It's also worth mentioning that I chose that particular note because it's the tonic or root note of the song, which means that when we set up our sampler, our keyboard is going to behave in a way that we would actually expect it to, as if we had built the patch from scratch. I'm going to right-click on the region, come down to Convert, and select Convert to New Sampler Track. In this dialog box, we select how we want Logic to handle the audio. In this case, I'm going to select regions because we want to encapsulate that entire note into our sampler. If we choose transients, which is better for drums, it'll break down the audio information into chunks based on the transients and then place them on different notes of the sampler. So we'll choose region for now, and I'll delete the word stem from this because now it's going to just be our synth, and select OK. So Logic has now muted the original region and created a MIDI track with a MIDI note in it. Let's take a listen. It's identical. Here's the original synth, and here's the EXS sampler. It's identical, but now we have more control. So over here in the instrument section, I'll click on the EXS24, and we're actually just going to focus on a couple of these controls. The first thing we're going to do is select Edit on this side. Now, if you don't see that, you have to come into your Preferences, go to Advanced Tools, and make sure that Advanced Editing is enabled. If I turn it off, then we can see now I just get this Options button. That's something that's new in Logic 10. As a matter of fact, if there's anything that you've seen me do or anyone else in these tutorials that you can't seem to access, come in and make sure that your advanced tools are selected. And you can also keep ones off that you don't really need. For example, I don't really have a surround sound system in here anymore, so I can turn that off if I want. So I'll go ahead and make sure that advanced editing is on. I will click this edit button, and we get this window. So it's pretty primitive, but it actually goes very deep into what you might want to do. Now this little note down here, this block, that is our sample. So that means that right now the only time it'll trigger on my MIDI keyboard is if I hit C sharp. So first of all, that's not great because we actually know that that's D sharp. So I'll come up here where it says pitch, key, and here in C sharp 2, I'll simply double click and type in D sharp 2. You can also scroll, but I found that to be a lot more difficult than just typing it in. D sharp 2. Okay, so now The note will still be D#2, but you can hear that it's actually playing a C#. So what we need to do is click and drag this note out either direction. So we're starting from D#1 now, going up to D#3, with our key grounding note being D#2. There it is. If I had left this at C#2 and hit D#, you can hear that's not a D# anymore. So we want to make sure that our root key is the key of the original instrument. So that if it's a vocal and she's singing an A, you'd set that to A, for example. So now we have this set up, and we can listen. There, it's programmed in. I'll go ahead and close out of this and make sure to save. And now we have it built in. There's a couple of things to just look out for. For example, with the EXS24, the way that it processes samples is that it actually speeds them up as if it were a piece of tape. So if I were to hit a higher note, then the sample ends faster than if I hit a lower note. I believe in Alchemy you can change that mode, and you may be able to in EXS as well. I just never have. I generally use Contact from Native Instruments, and they have like 3 or 4 different modes that you can use that will stretch the sound out in different ways so that you don't run into the same issue. For what we're going to do though, this is going to be just fine. Let's go ahead and start playing around with our sound. I want to have more of a pitch glide, because if you listen at the beginning of that, the attack has a little pitch dip, or rather a pitch rise. I want that to be longer, and I want it to be more dramatic so that it fills up more space. So over here in this section, we have our glide and pitcher. If I raise the glide up and drop our pitcher down, I'm gonna just hit D# one more time, and you'll hear right away what the difference is. So it's still our original sound, but it's almost as if the patch had changed. And of course we could do things like transpose it, set our velocity range, and also route LFOs and all that complicated stuff, and do filtering, which I do recommend you get into because it can sound pretty awesome. So anyways, we have now a glide and pitch. I'll go ahead and play out the rest of these MIDI notes and make sure that we have the same melody that the synthesizer is originally playing. Alright, so here the notes are. We have D#, C, A#, D. They follow along perfectly with the synth, but now they have that glide in them. Let's take a listen. And just as a reminder, this is the original. So there's a lot more movement. Now it does sound a little bit like Mario, but let's see how it sounds in context with the rest of the song. I'll go ahead and turn it up just so that we can hear it better. So you can actually hear that since we have those pitch bends going up during this section, when it drops down, it feels like it just sort of changes the vibe more. You might consider swapping these around so that you have the pitch glide coming in towards the end of that little section, but it's completely up to your tastes. Here's another quick example of how we can use sampling with real instruments to make different soundscapes and unique styles within our song. So this track, which I have no name for yet, so I just called it Yoga Song, as you can see at the top, is a chill out song that is probably about 98%, if not more, pure electronic instrumentation. But then I had a guitarist play some guitar over it. So here's how that sounds. You can hear these backwards guitars right here. To achieve that, I used essentially the same technique that we just looked at, but I used contact. And in contact, I was able to reverse the sample, which you absolutely can do in the EXS24. I saturated it a bit, and I made sure that the speed was at 50%. From there, we can see that I brought in just the part where he strums this. So that's this. If I undo the reverse, but you see it's at 50%. So if I speed this up to like around 150, it's like that. And if I slow it way down, it essentially creates new instruments. So I'll set this back to 50%, reverse it, and we can listen to it with context. And with that, you've created a new texture using recorded instruments in a whole new way, getting a sound that you could never achieve by just pure instrumentation. In a previous video, we used white noise and auto filter to create a big swell at the end of the song Renegade by songwriters Raz and Kevin Proctor. Right now we're going to look at how to take that into more of a synthesis level by adding in more tones with Massive. Now I found that the key of A seems to actually be pretty good. I'm not sure if that is the note that she's playing on her strings, but it definitely fits in with the song. So what we're going to do is use an LFO to control the pitch of the synthesizer. And this for sure is going to be a bit deep, but you'll be fine, trust me. It's not that hard once you get the hang of it. So an LFO, or a low frequency oscillator, essentially is just a way to automatically change parameters within a synthesizer. These are called low-frequency oscillators, or LFOs, because in the old analog days, it would literally use just a low-frequency oscillator to change these parameters. So if you click on one of these little compass with the 4 arrows right here, and then drop the number into any of these little boxes within Massive, that then routes the LFO to that parameter, and it will actually change the sound based on the wave shape of your LFO. So you can see right now LFO number 5 has a little sine wave in it. Now if you click on the number that you dropped in the box and drag either up or down, then it will tell Massive what range it is you want to manipulate the sound by. Here we go. My favorite solo. And this will work on other parameters too. Let's say we turn it off on the pitch and drop it onto the low pass filter. Sounds a little bit like dubstep. Right, so that's how it works. It's just a way to automatically manipulate parameters. What we're going to do is we're going to drag this all the way down over here on the left-hand side, all the way down to -64 semitones. And I'm going to reset our pitch to 0 semitones. Now, using our ratio, we're going to make this be an entire phrase. So, with that, we can listen to what our pitch is doing now. You heard that it started up here and shot down. So that's because this is a sine wave. You can see if I were to just move this around, it looks like just a sine. That's what it is. Now, if we use something more like the shape of a saw wave, it will be a linear and more gradual slide down in pitch, or whichever parameter you choose. Massive has many different wave shapes built in, so you can actually really take full control of the sound. Starting low, raising up, higher, higher. Just like that. So we also want to make sure that our MIDI note is a full phrase. So we'll actually, well, this is actually what we'll do. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4 bars. So this will actually be a 4-to-1 ratio. All right, sounds goofy, but there it is. With some reverb, not so goofy sounding, and also probably changing the sound itself. Let's take a listen. Here it is with our white noise back in there. Okay, so it still sounds sort of like Mario, and that's because the default wavetable that Massive has is a saw square, which is your most basic analog synthesizer sound. But Massive and Serum are both really cool because they use wavetable synthesis, which means that they use kind of like a sample of a synth sound or an algorithm and turn that into a playable instrument. There's also a wavetable synthesizer inside of Logic, which is the retro synth if you choose the table option. Alright, it's getting a little bit better. We can also use some unison style detuning, which is just like what we saw in Serum in a previous video. Okay, I think that's good enough for now. We're going to bounce this in place, call it rising tone, BIP, or bounce in place. It has its tail at the end there. And we'll definitely have to adjust the volume with to fit with the music, but we'll probably have to turn it down, so why don't we start? Alright, so I messed up the timing on that, but that's A-okay because I actually think it sounds kind of goofy, this last little bit where it goes too high-pitched. It sounds kind of like a spaceship taking off, so I'm not a huge fan of that. We can go ahead and just delete that and move over our tail and add a little crossfade in between the two. Now let's listen to how that sounds. By combining some EDM techniques with the original rock music, we were able to create a giant swell at the end of this song to give it the big impact that it was missing. The last piece about effects is going to be MIDI specific. If I open up here, what's a fun one? Let's put a ring shifter on. So this is Raz's strings. So here it is dry, 100% wet. Obviously not what we want for the song, but I want you to be able to really hear the difference. So what I'm gonna do is use the smart knobs that came with Logic 10. So down here, these are these mappable knobs that communicate with your plugins on the strip. So you can see right now we just have gain and ring shifter because over on the strings track we only have gain and ring shifter up. If I start moving the frequency knob down here, sorry, let me close the inspector. If I start moving the frequency knob down here, you can see it actually moves the plugin and vice versa. So we'll go ahead and leave this back at kind of an extreme setting. And we also have control of dry wet. Now you can change what these knobs actually are controlling. It's super easy to do. You just go to learn, and let's say we want feedback. We don't want feedback to be what controls this knob, but rather we want this to be the stereo width. Oh, I guess we already had a stereo width knob. All right, that's fine. We want this to be the level. All right. Cool, perfect. And I'm also gonna, I don't really like the name of it as delay amount, so I'm just gonna change it up here to level. And I will turn off learn, and now there we go. We have it controlling our level. So what's an advantage of putting stuff into these smart knobs? You know, if it's something that you're only gonna set once, you don't need it down here. And if it's something that you know you can access from the plugin, why do you want it in that area? Simply because if you have some automation, you'll have to go through this entire menu of the ring shifter to find exactly what you want. So I believe what I had put on there was here. So there's the frequency one. Now that's not that difficult when it comes to this kind of plugin, but there's some plugins like Absinthe or Guitar Rig where you have to go through hundreds of these little options, and it doesn't look any nicer. It's just text on like a blackish gray background. It's terrible. But since they live in your smart controls as well, you just come up to this top part where it says smart controls and you select the one you want. Oh, here we go, dry wet. Now I have it. There we go. And I'm controlling it that easily and that fast. Same, let's go back. Let's go here and let's play with our frequency. That fast. And you can also see the live update, which does make it pretty nice.